When an avoidant gets their fears triggered, they deactivate. Deactivation is when they go cold, they shut down. They push their partner away emotionally and withdraw from physical intimacy. They suppress their feelings for their partner. They block off their own access to their own feelings for their partner. And this is how they keep themselves safe. It's due to their attachment wounds from childhood, by withdrawing emotionally and creating emotional distance in the relationship. When you're on the receiving end of this, it is absolutely blindsiding. You're likely blaming yourself, wondering what it is that you did wrong to cause them to flip a switch on you. One day they're seeming all into it, being all affectionate, and the next day they're stone cold. And this can happen very quickly, and they can rapidly end the relationship with a blindsiding discard, or they can slowly deactivate and pull away and pull away and pull away and fade out of the relationship. And when you ask for answers, they're not giving you much, if any. Just vague excuses or even gaslighting you and telling you that everything's fine, nothing's wrong, they're just busy with work, etc., etc. The reason they do this is to protect themselves in a maladaptive way. It goes back to childhood. This is a person that received consistent childhood emotional neglect. They weren't given the love and the nurturing in the way that they needed. Their feelings were routinely dismissed, often growing up in households where you don't talk about feelings. They had to figure out how to deal with emotions and stress and any kind of crisis on their own. So they learned to avoid, to suppress, avoid, and put on a happy face. They often had parents or caretakers that had very high expectations, that were very controlling, but not in a nurturing way. So they grew up to feel smothered, and they struggled to meet the expectations of their parents or caretakers. The end result is a person that fears emotional closeness, emotional intimacy. And that's because they learned if you rely on someone for your emotional needs, this person is likely to reject you, disappoint you, or perhaps even outright abandon you. And if you allow emotional intimacy to build, you're likely to lose your independence, to lose your autonomy, because their parents, their caretakers were smothering, controlling, with high expectations that really couldn't be consistently met. So now in the relationship, something has triggered those wounds. The feeling like they're going to get rejected, they're going to get abandoned, they're going to be exposed as not being good enough, that they're going to lose their independence, they're going to get controlled. One of the main reasons they put up these walls in the relationship is to prevent their partner from figuring them out. You see, they personalize that neglect, that emotional neglect as a child, growing up to feel defective, unlovable, like there's something wrong with them. So they put up these walls and they keep their partner on the other side of the wall, because as long as the partner's on the other side of that wall, they feel safe because they can't get exposed as what they perceive themselves to be, which is defective and unlovable. So when emotional intimacy grows in the relationship, they begin to feel anxiety because they've learned that that intimacy isn't safe for the reasons we just talked about. So they start to do deactivating behaviors. Their fears have now been triggered. So they look for ways to create emotional distance to help themselves feel safe again. They'll start to think deactivating thoughts like, this relationship, maybe it's not working out so well. They like Italian food, but I really like American food. And we're just incompatible. They like to go hiking a lot, and I really prefer to go boating. And there's just too many differences. It's not going to work out. And ultimately, I'm just going to disappoint them. And I don't like the way they sip their coffee. Looking for perceived little flaws in their partner, little incompatibilities to justify their sudden urge to create emotional distance, to feel safe. And other things can trigger them too, like maybe a small disagreement, which in their mind means a fundamental incompatibility. They weren't able to express their feelings as a child, so any kind of disagreement feels terrifying to them because they're used to having their feelings rejected. Expressing their emotions leads to rejection and abandonment, at least in their mind. And if you have any kind of expectations on the avoidant as their partner, they feel like, well, Any expectations are insurmountable. They could not meet expectations as a child. So any expectations, even the bare minimum in a relationship as an adult, well, it feels like it's inevitable that they're going to disappoint their partner and let them down and get exposed as not being good enough. So emotional distance is really how they feel safe. And deactivating behaviors, deactivating thoughts, it helps create that emotional distance. It helps them justify their sudden urge to create that distance, because that distance is really a maladaptive self-defense mechanism. But when you're on the receiving end of it, it is really agonizing. It really, really is. And you're not getting any kind of explanation. And the anxiety can absolutely build as this person pulls further and further and further away from you. And they shut down, they get cold, and any attempts to get through to them are met with more distancing. They're getting colder, they're getting more vague, and perhaps even ghost and just disappear altogether. Don't blame yourself. If you were a consistent, loving, affectionate partner, you didn't cause this. It's the growing emotional closeness that caused it. The emotional closeness that naturally builds in a loving, healthy relationship. But it is specifically healthy relationship behaviors that trigger them. Now, typically with a dismissive avoidant, that window of when they tend to start to deactivate is usually between 4 to 8 months. Early in the relationship, their fears haven't been triggered yet. And it's the shared fantasy phase, because it's not a real relationship. It's a fantasy. It's a romance novel. It's a fairy tale. And they're getting all that dopamine, the feel-good hormone that goes off in the brain early in the relationship. There's no real emotional intimacy because they don't know you yet, so that fear hasn't been activated. So they let all these bottled up, suppressed emotions flow out onto you. But then as intimacy builds and the relationship becomes more real, they get their anxieties, their fears triggered, and then the deactivation begins. With a fearful avoidant or some dismissive avoidance, it can be further into the relationship, and it can have other factors that are included, like built up resentments over things that they never communicated about. Again, communication about their wants, needs, and feelings is scary, so they often just suppress it, bottle it up, and fail to communicate. But those unmet needs and feelings can build up into resentment, which again can trigger that deactivation process. The best thing that you can do if you're in a relationship with somebody who is deactivating and pushing you away is to hold that boundary. Boundary being your limits of what you want, don't want, what you need, don't need, what you'll tolerate, what you won't tolerate, and also your expectations. The secure person would say, hey, I've noticed that there's been some distance and there really hasn't been much in the way of communication. Is this relationship something that you're still interested in maintaining? And if they say, yes, I've been busy with work, simply hold that boundary and say, consistent communication is important to me. Spending quality time together is also important to me. And I feel like that's something that's vital for a healthy relationship and the kind of relationship that I need. I can't force you to want that, but it is a boundary for me. And if that's not something you're able to do, then this relationship doesn't work for me. And that can mean potentially walking away from the relationship if they're not willing to meet that need or boundary. If they walk away because you held that boundary, you had that need or expectation, what they're really telling you is that they were never going to meet your expectations and they were not really all that concerned about meeting your needs. Because when they are deactivating, they're not thinking of how this impacts the other person. They're not considering the kind of anxiety and pain it causes to the person that's being deactivated against. They're thinking of themselves and whatever it is that they perceive they want, need, feel, or fear in the moment. They're not really in a position where they have the capacity or the willingness to empathize with the other person and to consider the needs of the other person. And that's one of the core components of emotional availability, is the ability and willingness to empathize with your partner, to feel their emotions along with them. So hold that boundary and recognize your wants, needs, they matter. And if this person is not willing to emotionally participate in the relationship the way you need, that's on them, not on you. Don't blame yourself.